Thank you so much, Dr. Seltzer, Dr. Julie. It's wonderful to be here with everybody. And I am so honored to be kicking off Masechet Sukkah. I believe today we're on Daf Chet. We're on page 8, right? And if that's, correct me in the chat if I'm totally off. But this is going to be a review of the previous 7 dapim, the 7 pages and folios. I want to point out that, going into Tractate Sukkah, which I had probably learned bits of, but I'd certainly never learned significant amounts of. I was a little scared and intimidated, and yet, while there are some interesting pages that are difficult, there's a lot of richness and breadth to it. They really don't just stick to technical points that you could imagine. So when in reviewing this, I'll try to touch on more of the less technical points and more of sort of the broad lessons that we learn. There's theology in this, and there's all sorts of really interesting, clever phrases that you can use that are commonly used. There are wild concepts of impurity that we'll sort of touch on, and I'm not going to have time to really go in depth, but really great stuff. So I just want to mention that it starts sort of strange with the Mishnah about that it's what kind of sukkah is puzzle, is invalid. So that's sort of like a downer kind of, but maybe the idea is since it starts with a sukkah that is too high, that is puzzle, is invalid. It's teaching us a little bit, starting off Tractate Sukkah with a little bit of modesty, that, a 20, not foot, 20 amot, so it's like 30 feet, maybe 40 feet high sukkah, is maybe a little bit haughty for sukkah. We'll see one of the reasons is sort of does touch on that. But, I think in general, that's sort of a big statement that taking this down a peg, and that in some ways, I think there is this beautiful idea that Sukkot is a holiday of a modesty, of going out in nature, of leaving our home and leaving our fancy homes with, hopefully, I don't know if you have high ceilings, but I'm always envious of people's homes when they have high ceilings. So teach us that kind of modesty. So we're going into it in that way. And it doesn't explain all the other puzzles that are mentioned in this first Mishnah, meaning the other invalid, this is invalid and that's invalid. But maybe in general, it's really true to the idea of Sukkot is after our harvest season, when we take stock of our profits, when the farmer would take stock of their profits, we go in and we need a little bit of modesty. That's why we read the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, on Sukkot. There's a tradition to read that book because it's also a book that takes us down a peg and says us, Hevel Havalim Hakol Hevel, however you translate that, nothingness of nothingness, all is nothingness. I know there are better translations that are more positive, but so having said that, I'm excited about this, and we jump into Tractate Sukkot on Daf Bet, of course, on the second page, second folio, which is the first folio that we encounter, with 3 different explanations of why is a sukkah so high invalid. Rabbah says that, and this I think is the more the common understanding is that you don't notice the schach, that is the covering, that is if it's over 20 amot. And if you remember from Tractate Shabbat, that that was not about Shabbat here, we'll talk about later about connecting to Shabbat, but about the Hanukkah menorah, that you can't put it 20 cubits, 30 feet, 40 feet above, because people won't notice it. And it's interesting that part of, at least according to the Tur, was a later commentary, a later halachic legal expert of the late medieval period, understanding Sukkot is not just technical, it's really understanding that we're in the sukkah because God took us out of Egypt and protected us through the wilderness. That is an inherent part of the observance of Sukkah. So this schach that's so high, according to Rabbah, he quotes a beautiful verse that you should know. L'man yidu dorotechem. God says, I want your generations to know that that why you're sitting in the sukkah. So that's one explanation. Then there's more technical explanations. The shade, if it's too high, the shade's coming from the wall. It's not coming from the schach. Rava says that it's sort of what I started with is a little bit haughty, that it makes it feel like it's a permanent home and it's supposed to be a temporary home. We'll see a bit later that that's kind of paradoxical because we're kind of supposed to also build it in the form of a permanent home, but it's not supposed to look like a permanent home. So anyway, these are three different explanations that on the second side of Daf Bet Amud Bet, folio 2b, they all get argued, and this one doesn't work, and that one doesn't work, and why this one doesn't make sense, that one doesn't make sense. There also, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that it could be 40 or 50 amot, it could be 100 feet high, and that's fine. And we talk about, I love it, about Hilani the queen, who was a righteous queen. She only did what the rabbis said, and yet her sukkah was really very high. So they kind of explain that, and they talk about how that is possible. But it's just really neat to hear, from a hero. We don't always mention a lot of women in the Talmud, so it's wonderful to hear that, and to hear how it worked out, especially because there's sort of an underlay that in this tractate that women don't, according to the laws, it's in the Talmud, have an absolute obligation to sit in sukkah. So it's neat that Hilani Amalka, Helene the queen, comes up. So we get to an important point in the beginning of folio 3, Gimel Amud Aleph, that how big it has to be. And it seems you have to fit your head, and most of you, and a table, does the table have to be in it? It's a whole discussion. Does it have to be 4 by 4, 4 cubits by 4 cubits? That is, again, that's like 16, that's like 8 feet by 8 feet. That's discussed. But what's really interesting, I find interesting on folio 3, is this idea of a mini house. You see on HGTV sometimes, people wanting to live in mini houses. How big is a house? And it seems like 8 by 8 feet, or let's say a cubit could be, people estimate maybe 1.5 feet. So 6 feet by 6 feet is kind of the smallest room that the rabbis recognize a legitimate room. And that has, as we see on folio 3, on Daf Gimel, that has ramifications for mezuzah. Do you need to put a mezuzah on it? Well, if it's so small, you don't have to. And certainly, if it's, but the point is that since a sukkah is a temporary house, it can be smaller than those 4 cubits. And love this, borgnine is the word for like a flimsy house made of reeds for kind of the guard in the fields. This is on 3b, on Gimel Amud Bet. And I think of the 3 little pigs. I don't know what the moral of the 3 little pigs is, but in any case, one of them was kind of made with reeds, I guess, with flimsy. I don't know whether that's the straw one or the stick one, but somewhere in the middle. So that was a borgnine. And I guess it didn't didn't hold up to the wolf, but the rabbis have a really powerful concept here. Chazi, that is a valid house, or a sukkah can be, if it can be that borgnine, can be made of that flimsy material, because I love this concept, chazi lemiltaihu. It's suitable for its purpose. Like, okay, might want to live in a house made of cement or wood or straw, bricks, great. But this borgnine, which is just meant to, give a little bit of shelter to the poor person who has to be in the field, watching the field, chazi lemiltaihu, is suitable for its purpose. And I guess that's kind of a lesson in life. We're all different, and some people are super high achievers and other this and that. We're not all going to be the president of the United States. Maybe we don't want to be. But chazi lemiltaihu, are we suitable for who we are? The role that God has given us. So that's a little bit of philosophy, but I think it's real. Okay, we get to a kind of difficult halachic discussion on 4a, which was about impurity, kind of this technical thing that if there's a dead body in the room, if there is a kind of a tum'ah vent, an impurity vent. So if there's enough room, a tefah, for that impurity to get out of the room and go through a window, it's kind of strange because we don't think of it as physical, this, tumah, tahara, purity, impurity. But in any case, if there is a vent, then it can go out. If not, it goes all the way up to the heavens. Remember, you saw those crazy stories about people flying, I think it was El Al and Kohanim, priests, and they cover themselves up with like saran wrap, and because they were afraid that El Al would be flying over, someone would be flying over a cemetery. So, and the tumah, the impurity, which a Kohen is not allowed to come in contact with, would go up to the heavens. So that's a whole discussion about graves, but here it's sort of a similar idea. What's, I think, most significant for us is that this concept of, so the idea is if there's a dead body and you fill it all up with pillows, this will touch on the idea of how high the sukkah is, again, 20 amot, and between the floor and the schach, and what can you put on the floor? Let's say, you have walls that are 30, 40 feet. What do you do about it? The schach is too high. Can you put stuff on the floor to fill it up? And so that the floor is kind of elevated so that the schach is not too high. So they bring in all this stuff about impurity, but great concept, such a powerful concept. And I guess we remember it from Tractate Brachot and Tractate Psachim, Batla dato etzel kol adam, that sometimes your own view, your own thinking becomes nullified when it, in regards to everyone else. Similar kind of concept that I'm thinking of is the laws of mourning. Like there are no laws of, if you're in Shiva and it's a holiday, and the holiday, Passover or whatever it is, then you have to end your Shiva. And even if you haven't even started your Shiva yet, but unfortunately a dear one has passed away, you cannot start your Shiva during the holiday, because we say that the joy of the community overtakes your own personal joy. So there is a powerful concept that you are not your own view, if you nullify certain crops or things that are in that room, it might not be valid. We can, this is sort of the technical thing on 3b, but we turn to a more Sukkah thing about the hutzin. Hutzin are these little bits of schach that come down. It's always frustrating, the schach falling in your chicken soup, if you have pine or whatever. So they're always, and I'm kind of, I don't know why, I'm, shoving it up a little bit because they fall down and kind of they get in your way. Again, it doesn't work so well with bamboo, and that, our modern day halachic, legal twists. So in any case, these things that fall down, let's say the schach is invalid because it's over 20 amot, 20 cubits high, but you have bits of this that are falling down that are less than 20 cubits high. So what do we say? And that's a classic big law in Sukkot. If the tzilta meruba mechamta, if there's enough pine branches that are kind of falling down within the 20 cubit amount allotted to a sukkah, height allotted to the sukkah, if enough of them are sort of falling down, then it's valid. Meaning, if they give more shade than sun. So that's tzilta meruba mechamta. Tzeil is shade, chama is sun. Is the schach, the valid schach, providing more shade than sun? That's a big halacha. Oh my gosh, I remember in our synagogue in Chicago, there was like a tree over the sukkah, and then you had to calculate, is the tree providing more shade than not, and how much schach do we need? It's very complicated, which we'll learn about no doubt later, but that's sort of the so if enough is hanging down that provides more shade than sun to the sukkah, then it's valid. So I am excited that on 4a, we finally get to some pictures, illustrated. And these are pictures within Rashi. So I guess Rashi maybe drew them, maybe drew them later. I'm going to share for just a moment. They're not great pictures, but I noticed, and let me share my screen. Hopefully not too much will come up. Here we go. There we go. So, there we go. Good. Okay, so this is right in the Gemara. And I was saying to Dr. Seltzer, to Julie before, that it kind of shows there's a philosophical idea that, we always think words are the most important thing. We're starting the portion of Eila Hadvarim. These are the words that Moshe shared to the people of Israel. But sometimes words are not enough. Sometimes a picture, says 1,000 words. I didn't butcher that, but and I know Elie Wiesel, of blessed memory, says sometimes a word can speak 1,000 pictures, which is true. But pictures are important. Even though the Torah says at Mount Sinai we only heard words, we didn't see pictures. Tmuna in Chamorim. So it is really fun that there are pictures in this, and we shouldn't feel that, oh boy, the Gemara and Sukkah is really dumbing down because it's full of pictures. No, when you see pictures, it's trouble. It means that it's ramping it up a little bit. So in any case, this is a picture of an itztaba, of a balcony, of a ledge, and the whole, here we go again, with height, it's too high. Can we stick kind of a balcony in the Sukkah? And that makes the schach less high. It's not 20 cubits from the ground. It might be 25 cubits from the ground, but it's only 15 cubits from this balcony. And here we have a picture of the balcony on the side, the balcony in the front. So it's a whole discussion. We get to the one on the side, get to a great concept, crazy concept, I would say, but it's Dofen Akuma. It is the concept of a bent wall. So the walls of a sukkah, they're normally vertical, and they can be bent a little bit, but we say it could be even bent up to, 4 amot or something like that. So arba amot, yeah, there we go. So it can be bent. This is a divine concept. So on 4b, it says, Rashi says, I love this, Agmare Rachmana LaMoshe. I'm going to stop sharing now that we saw these pictures. God taught Moshe the concept of a bent wall. And you can imagine Moshe saying, what are you talking about, God? I mean, a house, it's a vertical wall. God says, never mind. This is my Torah. It's it's sticking out. It can stick out up to, you can have like an addition, a horizontal addition to the vertical wall of 4 cubits, and it's still considered the wall. So there you go. What am I going to do? Argue with God? So, I mean, I guess, Moshe has to pick his fights. So Dofen Akuma, the bent wall, was not one of the fights that Moshe had to fight. We have another great concept on 4b of Gud asik mechitza, that a mechitza, that sometimes a separation goes way up, that if it's high enough, if it's 10 hand breadths, around, let's say 30 to 40 inches, then we consider it going all the way up a little bit. Remember, just like a daf ago or half a daf ago, we, the previous side of Daled, of 4, talked about, or maybe it was 3b, anyway, talked about the impurity going up to the heavens. And here we have the mechitza going up to the heavens. So if you're in a synagogue and you're worried that the separation between the men and the women in an Orthodox synagogue, nebuch, is too low, you really want a wall. Well, there is the concept that as long as it's 10 hand breadths, you can consider it going way up, and you can be very comfortable if that's what you're into. There's just a lot of work here in trying to get a sukkah kosher, a sukkah that's over 20 cubits kosher. So now, we get to this concept. Get my notes out again. Sorry. I love it. Why is a sukkah that's under 10 hand breadths pasul, also invalid? And by the way, there's like a little quote. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of this and this, and then it says, when in Seder Moed, when it says Rabbi Yochanan, you should read Rabbi Yonatan. So I love this, with the tradition, I love it. The tradition says something. Well, sometimes the tradition says that the tradition is wrong, that the tradition is that Rabbi Yochanan is really Rabbi Yonatan. So it's just interesting that, what are the facts? What are the, facts? Not necessarily. So in another case, Rabbi Yonatan says, how do we know this 10 handbreadths? I love it. From the ark, which was 9 handbreadths high, to plus the covering over it was, the kaporet was 1 more handbreadth. So it's kind of, okay, but we get to 5a, this is like a interesting theological idea of God, because we know God came, this is the Ark of the Covenant. God came to speak to the people of Israel. So God kind of comes down a little bit and we go up, and Rabbi Yossi says, the divine presence doesn't quite come down to our earth. It comes down within 10 tfachim and 10 handbreadths. And Moshe and Eliyahu, when they go up, and this is sort of disputed, don't go up more than 10 handbreadths. So it's kind of, thank Laura, I love your expressions. Oh, everybody. But I love it. The idea is that there's a big argument around across the Talmud about, does God come down? Do we go up? God does come down very close, 30 inches, really, really close. God doesn't get involved in the lowest of the lowest stuff. I mean, God sees, anyway, this is traditional theology. We can argue about this. But it's a great idea that we want to bring God into this world, but sometimes you read the news, wow, there's so much terrible stuff in this world. How can we, and the Greeks, of course, Aristotle, and even the Rambam and some of the others, Ralbag, Gersonides said, no, God doesn't have any business. God doesn't know what's going on in this world. God only knows, God doesn't know particulars. So this God does, but not all. And likewise us, we go up, but we don't escape the world. Moshe, Eliyahu don't escape the world. So beautiful concept. Oh my gosh. Dr. Seltzer, you say, I thought this would be like a 10-minute thing. So I'm learning. Okay. Important. Don't forget the phrase from 5a, tafasta maruba lo tafasta. Great. Sounds good. If you hold for too much, you don't get anything. So it's sort of tafasta mua. It's trying to explain, how do we know that the cover to the Ark of the Covenant was only 1 tefach? Because don't take too much. Take 1 tefach. If you try to take more, you don't get it. So very beautiful concept of let's be satisfied. I love Rabbi Eliezer took a trip to Rome. He visited Rome, and he saw what that tzitz was, the thing on the forehead piece was that said, holy to God, on the high priest. But most significant to me is this, that he took this trip to Rome. That's great. How bad was Rome? But you still, whatever, took a vacation there. Cherubs are these little, because again, we're talking about how high was this 10 cubits again, not 10 cubits, 10 handbreadths for the minimum of a sukkah. So we look at maybe the cherubs that were on top of the ark. Cherub, it says, means a little baby. In Babylon. So first we got Rome, now we get Babylon, all our good friends. So especially before Tisha B'Av, it's interesting that, but we learn from everybody. So in Bavel, they call a Yanuka Ravia. They call a baby a Ravia. So that's a cherub. Keruv is like Ravia. So, so that's why you see all those baby angels flying around, those little chubby little babies. Those are cherubs. So we go to a lot of stuff, and in the end of the day, it says, I can throw a lot of verses at you, but it's all, those don't mean anything. It's Hilchat Ninhu. It's all tradition, these measurements, how big this is, how big that was. Even that lovely verse, Eretz Chita Useora, that lovely verse about the 7 species is all about teaching us that measurement. So 6b gets into a whole discussion. Is it really kind of 3 walls or 4 walls? Again, a big discussion based on going back to verses Sukkot, 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 just in Sukkot, how it's mentioned. Is there a vav? Is there not a vav? Classic argument about yesh em l'masoret, that kind of the mother, the principle is the way things are written in the Torah, or yesh em l'mikra. Sometimes the mother of all is the way it's read, because sometimes the way it's written is not the way we read the Torah traditionally. So there's a big argument about that, and that's Sukkot. Is it spelled with a vav? Spelled without a vav? It's read like with a vav, Sukkot, but sometimes it's written without a vav. So a big discussion of that. When we get to 7a, I say I have 2 minutes, but great question about the Shechina saying 10 handbreadths from Bnei Israel. Yeah, it's an interesting, I think what I would say is that we can rise up to 10 handbreadths. God comes down up to 10 handbreadths. So we can, the idea of revelation is touching God, just like Aaron, Moses, and Miriam were all left the world with a kiss of God. That's really the point that we can get to. God comes down, we go up, and we kiss God. We come into that point. So 7a, I just got to give you for 1 second some pictures. There we go. And let me, 1 second. Sorry, I'm going to move this. Oh, okay, here we go. Sorry. Next. Okay. Here we go. Look at these pictures. This is amazing. A sukkah that only has 2 walls, but can have 1 handbreadth of another wall. So that's amazing. So you don't need 4 walls. You don't need 3 walls. You need 2 and a bit. So it's a big question. Where is that extra little stick that's like 3 inches or 4 inches? So sort of on the top, they say, well, on the previous page, it said anywhere, then on the top here, and then all different types of suggestions where that needs to be. Consult with your local authority to how that goes. 7a, also great concept of levud, of when things are within 3 tfachim, 3 handbreadths, they're kind of considered joined. Very powerful thing. We get into lots of discussion of Shabbat on 7a, and then 7b on Shabbat, a weird kind of Sukkot, circular Sukkot, all that on 7b. Okay, and I'm 8 is, I think, today's daf. I will, but I do want to show you, there's that weird one, that circular one. Oh my gosh, I'm not getting into this. I don't know who's going to do it for today, but this is pi. This is figuring out circles and squares and geometry. I didn't like math in high school, but math is a very important subject, and they're trying to figure it out. Look at that, figuring out pi. You take the radius there and you cut the circle, and then you flatten the circle and you turn it into 2 pieces, then you put them together. Oh, those rabbis are so smart. So this is in Tosfot. So that's a great challenge for today. And then you have just one other point. You have this Gan Bach, a sukkah that's made by people who are, this is on 8b, who have no obligation to build a sukkah, but do build a sukkah. Is it valid? And there's a big difference between the Babylonian and the Jerusalem Talmud. The Babylonian tells us it is kosher. It's great. The Jerusalem Talmud is not so sure, is not so happy with that. So we're gonna, just to summarize for coming up, or preview, all about schach. So the next 7 pages at least are really all about what kind of schach is good, what kind of schach is not bad. Oh my gosh, there's always a problem. We're going to cut down the tree, and then is there enough bamboo? Do we have enough schach? And did Bnei Akiva deliver the schach to the shul? Did they not deliver the schach? So, Sukkot is kind of sometimes a headache, but it's inspiring, and really this tractate, it just seems, I would say, desperate, so eager to teach us deeper ideas from the technical things. It doesn't want to just stay on the technical level. It wants to go from sukkah has to be more than 10 tfachim, 10 handbreadths, to God's presence. It talks about how high it is, and that contradiction, which was pointed out earlier by one of our learners here, that a sukkah in some ways has to kind of have the image of a permanent place. It can't be a schleppy place. And on the other hand, can't be too fancy, can't feel like it really is permanent. So we really have those two concepts, but I think that's a very deep concept for us. We shouldn't be schleppers. You know, we are a holy people. We have to, you know, show the world that we have to be proud of our Judaism. On the other hand, we have to have modesty. We have to have humility. So I'm looking forward to these next dapim, and Yesher Koach for sticking with Masechet Sukkah. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Seltzer.